Hello, I'm Trisha Keene, and thank you for joining us wherever you're streaming us right now. This is Your Voice, Your Vote. And Nevada has been one of the hardest hit economies by this pandemic, and this election could have a big impact on our recovery. Joining me right now is Jeremy Aguero of Applied Analysis, and thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, a pandemic and an economic shutdown and a long climb back, which candidate is better suited to help with a recovery here in Southern Nevada?
That's pretty difficult to assess. The idea that the presidential candidate is going to be the determinative factor in terms of the recovery of an economy just isn't accurate. We will recover as an economy both nationally and here in Nevada, irrespective of which candidate ultimately wins. And to be perfectly honest with you, Tricia, it has more to do with Congress, what happens in Congress, than it does who ultimately takes the White House.
All right. So would 4 more years impact Las Vegas if it were Trump versus Biden then?
Well, look, I don't think there's any doubt that 4 more years of a Trump administration, there's things that President Trump is wants to push forward. First of all, we know that the stimulus package is likely to be a little bit less under a Trump administration than it probably will be under a Biden administration, as well as President Trump has pushed for a fairly significant infrastructure package, which could significantly benefit the state of Nevada overall. By contrast, you've got a Biden administration that without a doubt wants to push for greater stimulus, I guess, in the near term, but then also has some other things in terms of programs that would like to develop overall, and certainly some raising some taxes to make those things happen. We have a whole lot of people here in Southern Nevada in particular that have been struggling, as you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, relative to the economy. That social safety net is wearing somewhat thin, and there's no doubt that President Biden wants to fortify that.
And what would a Joe Biden presidency look like here? Would you tell a difference?
No, look, I think there's no doubt that we're going to notice a difference between the two administrations. I don't think they could be more divided in terms of their ideology. The Trump administration is clearly focused on the economy and getting it moving, aligned with Republican voters as their single most important factor, where a Biden administration certainly is concerned about the economy, but also has other factors, most notably things like climate change and what that's going to mean. President Trump has really been focused on reducing regulations, increasing and improving the environment for entrepreneurs and small businesses, where the Biden administration is really talking about trying to find ways to shore up the economy, particularly relative to workers and their position in the workforce. So when we think about our state, we think about where it is today, but ultimately where we're trying to get. And again, both the candidates have the potential of improving the economy, not so much because of their individual policies, but because they're going to benefit from the fact that a vaccine and likely a treatment in combination with that vaccine are going to be available probably as early as late this year or the spring of 2021, which should push our economy forward overall. So much of this conversation is what's going to happen over the next 3 months, over the next 6 months, as opposed to the next 4 years. And I think the difference between these two candidates is largely going to be 10 years worth of activity from an economic standpoint and where we will ultimately end up being.
And talking about that, Donald Trump says he has ushered in the best economy in history. Do you think that's true? And can he do that again with this vaccine, potentially, if he gets reelected?
Every president talks about the successes that they've had from an economic standpoint or tries to distance themselves from economic instability. We've seen it in at least every administration in my career. Do I believe that the economy has expanded under Donald Trump? Absolutely, I do. I think that there's little doubt about that. We saw near record low unemployment, a number of jobs coming back into the United States. And, we certainly saw a decrease in regulations that helped from an entrepreneurial standpoint and helped businesses create more jobs right here in the United States. And I think the president does deserve credit for that. But on the other side, of course, you've got the fact that the economy now is really struggling as a result of dealing with COVID-19 and the instability and asymmetry that we're seeing across the United States, not the least of which here in our tourism-based economy that is just really struggling to find any kind of solid footing.
Would Joe Biden's higher taxes on big corporations have a negative impact on our big resorts and the people ultimately working there?
Look, I don't think there's any doubt that increasing the corporate tax and also increasing the top end of the income tax will have some effects on people. The question really becomes, how would then President Biden work to deploy those dollars? How do you put that money back into the economy, and how would the state of Nevada benefit from that, right? I mean, it's one thing to talk about raising taxes. Obviously, that's going to be a negative for anyone who feels like they're the ones that are going to have to pay them. But the other side of the tax increase question is really, how are those dollars deployed? Are they put back into the market in terms of improved infrastructure? Are they put back into the communities in terms of improved education? Are those the things that we're doing? I mean, if we're merely talking about expanding the social safety net, of course, that could have some mixed effects. But part of what former Vice President Biden is talking about is really providing increased stimulus for state and local governments, including increasing the amount of the Medicaid match that goes out. And this is just a fancy way of saying the federal government's contribution to Medicaid that ultimately would benefit disproportionately a state like Nevada, and could really have significant positive benefits for us in this state.
Interesting. So what if there is this second wave of COVID, like experts are saying there will be? Who would you want in charge? And can Las Vegas really survive this?
Look, let me take the last part of your question first. Can Las Vegas survive this? The answer to that question is yes. We are going to survive. If Las Vegas has proven anything, it's that it's resilient and resourceful through any number of economic challenges. This is a formidable one. There's no doubt about it. It may be the most difficult one we've ever been through, but we will come together and get to the other side of this. In terms of which president is better in terms of dealing with this virus, I think it's all going to come down. This is a function of science. It's not a function of politics. We are close by every account to getting a vaccine. That is going to be critically important to get in the hands of our first responders and folks that are on the front lines in terms of medical and healthcare. And from that, we can start having it widely deployed, and our economy, consumers can feel more comfortable going back to be consumers. And frankly, Tricia, I think that's going to happen under a Biden administration or under a Trump administration. And I think that's what's ultimately going to be good for Nevada. You asked the question about this second wave. I think, in many ways that's happening already, and it has folks concerned, and it very well should have them concerned. But at the end of the day, when we get to the other side of that and we start to see the vaccine start to work, and our economy starts to going back to normal, if there's one thing that I've learned over 25 years of doing this for a living, it's that tomorrow tends to look a heck of a lot like yesterday. And I think that's what we're going to go back to.
My concern is really, and I've talked to you back in 2012, when we had the collapse of the housing market here. If we don't get this vaccine and you have more of the strip workers out of work and people and the eviction moratorium coming up, I mean, that seems like a really scary recipe. And if you went through the bottom of the housing market, it took so long to come back here, and we were just coming back and starting to look great, and then boom, the pandemic happened. It's concerning.
It's a great point. Yes, we lost a lot of jobs here, and we lost a lot of jobs that you and I talked about during the Great Recession. But we have also recovered about 60% of the employment that we lost during this COVID-19 crisis already. And that's a really positive thing. It took us almost 6 years to recover that same number of jobs during the Great Recession. And so, from that standpoint, I think that again, we've demonstrated that resiliency as an economy in terms of bringing it forward. And yes, I understand that people are concerned. I understand that people that all of this makes everyone nervous in terms of what's going to happen next. But again, if there's anything that we've demonstrated, when people said that Las Vegas was going to be the next ghost town in waiting, when people said we'd never recover, we find a way to continue to do that. And I think that's because of the pro-business, pro-resident environment that we've created. I mean, the American dream continues to exist here in Southern Nevada, and I don't think that's changed as a result of this virus existing. And to the beginning of your point, let's imagine a situation in which the vaccine isn't effective. Then what we're going to do is learn how to live with COVID-19 if we can't beat COVID-19. And again, I think by the spring of 2021, one of those two things is going to take hold.
All right. Jeremy Aguero, always great to have you. Great perspective. Thank you so much for your time.